everyone, it's Alice, and today I have made a list of books to share with you all, specifically books that blew my mind when I read them. Now, I think mind-blowing can mean a lot of things, and it can mean different things to different people, but what I thought of when I was gathering books for this stack are books that really made me like, whoa, when I read them. Either in like the middle of the book something happens, or at the end of the book and I'm sat thinking about it, like something that just blew my mind. I probably don't need to explain it this much, but I feel like some of these books sort of blew my mind for different reasons as well, so I'm gonna try to go into it and explain. Also, I know that some of the books that I'm gonna mention today, some people find super underwhelming, which is fine because we just like different things, but I think it's interesting that books can have such a different effect on different people, but I guess that's kind of the magic of it. Anyway, we have a mix of things today. We have some classics, some mysteries, some contemporary, all kinds of different things. And I will say some of these books are quite weird, so like maybe don't read those if you don't like weird books, because I really like weird books sometimes. We're gonna start with two classics that are sort of in the same vein. They're both dystopian books, but they do show us two quite different worlds. We have 1984 by George Orwell and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. You may already know that 1984 is one of my favorite books, and you probably already know what this is about, but if you don't, this is set in a futuristic dystopian society, and we're following a man who starts questioning the system and the totalitarian regime that he lives under. The reason that this book made such an impact on me, I think, is that when I read it, I felt like I suddenly understood all of these different concepts, and some of them I'd never really thought of or heard of, and some of them I sort of knew about but I didn't fully understand. A good example of that is doublethink that we see in this book. It's the idea that you can hold two opposite beliefs in your head at once and fully believe both of them, even though they contradict each other. Maybe other people just get that from other things or they just understand it, but this is the book that really made me understand it and like really think about that. I think the discussions around censorship are also really interesting in here, as well as the stuff about surveillance and propaganda. These things, like, I think about this a lot, and I think maybe it's like 10 years since I read this book. I still think about it all of the time. Like, it really, really made an impact on me. And at the core of this, we have this character who's trying to break free of this society as well, and it's just a really good book, I think. And although I understand that not everyone likes this book, I think it's a book that most people would benefit from reading. That being said, this is a little bit of like, not a slog to get through, that's very harsh, but it is a little bit heavy and it can be a little bit dry in points. And I would say that this is one of those books where I didn't feel like super connected to the characters or anything. They feel very much like they're there to show you the society, which is sort of the point of the book, to show you this dystopian society, and you sort of need characters there to fully understand it. And I'd say that, like, whenever I recommend this book to someone, I will never be like, you're gonna really enjoy this, because I don't know if it's really an enjoyable read, but it's a book that will probably make you think a lot. Like, that's what this book is. Brave New World, on the other hand, is a slightly more, I wouldn't say enjoyable read, but it's a little bit easier to read, I think. This one is set in, again, a futuristic society where humans are genetically bred for different purposes. They're all indoctrinated and they're all kept drugged to keep them happy. And all of them believe that they are living in a utopia, all at the small, small cost of their freedom, humanity, and individuality. I remember when I read this, I kept pausing when I was reading it and looking up from the book and just saying out loud, this is so effed up, because it really is. In 1984, we see a government that controls people through force and intimidation, but in this one, the government controls people by keeping them superficially happy so they don't care about their freedom. And in 1984, we have like torture and surveillance and very brutal control, but in this one, It's more about like technology and the government actually changing what people want and then giving it to them, even though they're in control of it. Like, the people have no control in this book. I would say The Brave New World is maybe a slightly more engaging read, but for some reason, 1984 is still my favorite. It's a little grittier, and I wouldn't say that it's darker because both of these books are quite dark, but there is like a vibe to 1984 that I just really got on with. I also did read 1984 before I read Brave New World, so that may have had something to do with it as well. But both of these just, I think they're really mind-blowing books. They explore some of the same concepts but in different ways, and I feel like they actually go great together. I really want to reread both of these, and I think I want to read them together this time because I think the first time I read these, there were a couple of years between them. I don't really remember. But yeah, both of these are so good, and I do feel like everyone should read them. I don't know if there really are any books that everyone should read, but if there are, these are the ones. Then we have another classic, which is also sci-fi, but it's totally different. It's Ubik by Philip K. Dick, which I don't even really know how to talk about this book. I still feel like I don't fully get it, but it was such a ride. It's kind of hard to explain, but it follows this technician at a psychic agency who starts experiencing glitches in reality and eventually realizes that there is this substance called Ubik that can temporarily reverse these effects. I feel like that explains what this book is about, but it also doesn't explain it at all because it just, there's so much else going on and it's a lot. This is one of the most trippy books that I've ever read, and I also really want to reread this one actually because I think it would be really interesting to reread when I know what's going on, because the first time I read this, I didn't understand anything until I got to the end and we sort of piece everything together. And even then, I don't feel like I still fully got it. So I think it could be really interesting to reread. I don't know how to talk about this book though, but I will say when I got to the end, I was like, oh my god, is that what's going on? And like, I didn't see it coming at all, but I also feel like who would see that coming? Moving on from the classics, I then have a contemporary book, which I will say, I like, there are a couple of books in this video that I don't necessarily recommend to really anyone because they are weird and messed up, and I just feel like they're really difficult books to recommend. So maybe don't read all of the books from this video. This is one of them that maybe you wanna, I don't know, think about a little bit before you read. It's Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. This is a coming of age story about this girl who grows up believing that her stuffed animal is an alien from another planet, and she basically has this belief as a sort of response to what's happening in her life. And then we meet her when she's an adult and she is just pretending to be normal, basically. She's going through life and just pretending. And then someone from her childhood comes back into her life and things take some turns. The thing that caught me off guard about this book are those turns, because I did not see where this was going to end up at all. And I don't really think anyone would. And I felt like I was sort of prepared for this book when I went into it because it's not my first book by this author. And I knew it was going to be weird, but I was not at all prepared. I can't tell you, like, why I was so gobsmacked by this book, but it just ends up in a really weird, kind of horrifying place. And it's also a very sad, sad book. It is, like, it delves into some really dark things though, and some taboo things, so like if you don't want to read about it, don't, because this book is definitely not for everyone. Then we have some mystery books, starting with a book that I often say is one of my favorite mystery novels ever. It's And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And this tells the story of 10 strangers who are all summoned to this island by an eccentric billionaire. And they don't really know what they're doing there. They clearly have very little in common, but it becomes apparent that all of them have a dark secret in their past, and someone has decided to punish them for their secrets, and so they start dying one by one. The thing that really did it for me in this one is that it's just so cleverly done. And I've read quite a lot of Agatha Christie, and so when I started this, I was like, this is gonna be good. But there is something about this one that I just feel like is so well crafted. And it's even a book that I feel like you could reread several times, even though you know how it's gonna end, because the way that you get there is just really, really clever. Then we have a book that I don't have a physical copy of, but I read this years and years ago. It's I Let You Go by Clare Mackintosh. This is a thriller that follows this woman who is desperate to escape her life, so she goes to live in this cottage in Wales, I'm pretty sure, and she's just trying to get away from everything, but she's still haunted by this one night that changed her life forever. That is kind of a vague summary, but I also feel like there's no way to really talk about this book without giving it away. And I also can't really tell you why it blew my mind because that would also give it away. But again, I felt like this was just really well crafted. And I remember when I read this, I would have to like put the book down sometimes and just walk around the room for a little bit because I was just like, there's no way this is happening. Like, there's no way. I will say, I do think part of the reason that this really did it for me is because this was the first thriller that I read that did this thing that this book does. And I think that if you've read a lot of books like this, maybe you would see it coming, but I didn't see it coming at all. So I had my socks knocked thoroughly off. Next, we have a mystery book where when I read the final page of this book, I, alone in my apartment, audibly gasped. And that never happens to me. I have this in Norwegian. It's called Mannen Morder by Hjorth Rosenfeldt, but in English this is called Dark Secret. This is a Swedish crime novel following a criminal psychologist and profiler who sort of accidentally gets caught up in this case about a 16-year-old that goes missing. And through this, he starts working with an old colleague from like the criminal investigation department in Sweden. And through this case, they make all of these discoveries about this school that this 16-year-old used to attend. A huge thing to note about this book is that if you don't like reading about unlikable characters, you will hate this book because the main character, the criminal psychologist, he is a nightmare. He's a horrible colleague, like the worst you can imagine. He's so arrogant and just mean sometimes, but unfortunately he's also really smart and he's actually really, really good at his job. But like, I gotta say, he is a real like asshole. I happen to be one of those people that actually likes reading about unlikable characters, so I really enjoyed that part of this because I thought it was really well done. I do think that the main character is a really interesting main character, and this is the first book in a series, and it's the kind of series where like we get a mystery in each book, but there's also some overarching stuff going on and like more than one story, I would say, and it's like one of those side stories. Like, that's the part that made me gasp in this. That's all I can really say, I think. I also remember that after I gasped, I immediately texted one of my best friends who actually recommended this book to me, and I'm pretty sure that text was all capital letters and exclamation points, and a little bit of like, how, like, why didn't you tell me? Of course she didn't tell me because she wanted me to have the experience, but I was like, I was just lost because I didn't see it coming at all, and it was such a good end to the book. I actually think it was just the final sentence. It was so good. Then we have a book that I feel like I mention all of the time, so it's probably not a surprise that it's here. It's The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, which is a mystery novel mainly, but then it has like some sci-fi fantasy stuff going on in it. It basically takes place in a time loop. Like, that's the sci-fi fantasy bit. And we're following this character who's living through this same day over and over. And he has been tasked to figure out who kills Evelyn Hardcastle at the end of this day. But there's a little bit of a twist. He wakes up in a different body every single day. So he wakes up in different bodies. They're at this like estate, and all of the people there are suspect. And he wakes up in different bodies every day and has to try to figure out what's going on? If that sounds a little complicated, it's because it is. And I think that this book is really confusing in the beginning, and it loses some people in the beginning because you're just thrown into it. Like, you're just there and you sort of have to figure it out. But when you figure out what's going on and you sort of start to grasp, like, the thing, it is such a roller coaster of a book. Like, it's such a ride. And there are, again, some twists, as there usually is in mystery novels, and there's like more going on than I can say. But I thought this was great, and I feel like when I got it, I was like, yes, this is so good. Then we're back to some sci-fi and dystopia, and the first one I have here, I feel like saying that this was mind-blowing is kind of hard to explain. It's sort of quietly mind-blowing. It's like mind-blowing in slow motion. It's I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This follows a character who lives in a cage with 39 other women, and they are all constantly watched over by these guards who never speak to them, and they don't know what they're doing there. None of them remember how they got there, and most of them only have vague recollections of the time before, but our main character doesn't remember anything from the time before because she's too young. And then one day an alarm goes off and that changes everything. This is a dystopian book, but it's very quiet in a way, and I actually think that quietness is kind of what did it for me in here. This isn't a book that will give you a lot of answers, or really any answers, so if you don't like that, this isn't the one for you. But there was something about that, like, quietness to this that I just thought was really interesting, and it really did it for me, and I don't really know why. Like, there is something about this book that just made it stick with me, and I think about this book all of the time. This is one of those that I know not everyone likes, though. Like, a lot of other people are like, this is the most boring book I've ever read. Which is fair, but I loved it, so here we are. Then we have a book that goes into the same category as Earthlings, in that I don't really recommend this book to anyone because, sheesh. It's Tender as the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, and this is set in a world where a virus has infected animal meat, so humans can't eat it anymore. And in response to that, the government has allowed for the breeding, processing, which is just code for slaughter, and eating of human meat. And we're following a character in this society who works at a processing plant, which is where they slaughter people so that others can eat them. And this guy is also like dealing with his own personal stuff and grief, and it's a real ray of sunshine, this book. This is not for the faint of heart, and I still don't really know how to talk about this book, but I do think I went into this like knowing what this book was about, but I don't think I was really prepared for it. So if you're gonna read this, just let me try to prepare you. If you think this is gonna gloss over anything, it doesn't. Like, it's right there in your face, and it has details to it that are just absolutely, it is something else. It is one of the few, or the only book I think that has ever made me physically nauseous, and it's just horrific. It is also, though, very well crafted, I think, and it's like a really great book, which feels like an insane thing to say, but I do think that it's very well done, and it takes a lot for me to have like a physical reaction to a book, so I feel like that says a lot about this book. The reason that I would never recommend this broadly to anyone is that I really feel like this isn't a book you can recommend unless you really know who you're recommending it to, and I think even if I knew the person really well, I wouldn't want them to read it because I don't want to do that to them. But yeah, I do think this is really good, but you have to have like the stomach for it, and it is absolutely brutal. It did kind of blow my mind into another dimension though, so I kind of just had to include it, but yeah, don't read it. Next, we have a book that was also kind of brutal, but in a different way. It's Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergey Dyachenko. And this is like sci-fi fantasy, I guess, and it follows this girl who, when she's on vacation with her mother, she is offered this place at this special institute of technologies, which she's never heard of before. And I'm saying she's offered a place. She decides to go, but she also kind of doesn't have a choice. And so she ends up at the school. And it is like the weirdest place. Like, they have these lessons where they have to memorize the stuff, but none of it makes sense. And there's all kinds of weird stuff happening. The teachers are really scary and they threaten them all of the time. And it's just like the worst place. It says on the back here that the main character discovers that this is no ordinary school. It definitely is not. Obviously, the story progresses quite a lot beyond what I just told you, and it becomes this like blend of magic and science and philosophy, and towards the end, it gets very conceptual. I found the ending a little bit difficult to understand. I feel like I understood it, but I don't know that I did. Like, I feel like it's sort of up for interpretation, but it gets very, yeah, conceptual is the only way to like explain it. It's super weird, but I really liked it, and I did not see the end coming at all. And again, I don't think you could, because like, how would you see that coming? Lastly, we have some nonfiction, starting with Infinity in the Palm of Your Hand by Marcus Chown. And this has like 50 bite-sized pieces of mind-blowing science. At least it was mind-blowing to me when I read it at the time. And I really like these kinds of books that just like presents something to you in a very digestible way, especially when they're like concepts that at least I don't have like a great understanding of. I thought this was really interesting though, and quite fun to read. There are a lot of cool facts in here, like you are a third mushroom, you're born 100% human but die 50% alien, which is interesting. Today's sunlight is 30,000 years old. I hate that. There's so many like things like that just really bother me, even though it shouldn't. It also says here, if the sun was made of bananas, it would not make any difference, which is interesting. I think the main one that I really remember about this one is a part that's about like how time travel is not ruled out by the laws of physics. That doesn't mean that it's actually doable. But I really remember that, and I remember that's one of the things that made me want to look into time as a concept, which I find really scary and it really bothers me, but I also kind of like learning about it. So I do think I should reread this though, because there's a lot here that I don't remember. Like, there's a liquid that never freezes and can run uphill, which is weird. That book does kind of tie into this last one though, because I'm pretty sure that book eventually made me read this book because I am fascinated by time. It's The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli, which is basically just a book about time and explains how that works, which time does not work the way that I thought it did. I still can't really wrap my mind around some of the stuff that I learned in this book, but it was very interesting. I like this is one of those things where like I really like learning about it, but it also really bothers me. Time and like the size of the universe are things that can keep me up at night, but despite the anxiety, I would really recommend this because it is very interesting. That was the last book in my stack though. I'm sure I could add more to this, but like those are the ones that I have to show you today. Now, I would love to hear if you have read any mind-blowing books and the reason that they blew your mind, whatever it is, big or small. I would love to hear about it in the comments. And yeah, that was kind of it. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!